Welcome to Book Bubble. I am Mariela, and I am a librarian at the Arlington Public Library. Have you ever left your home to go on a trip to someplace exciting? It's a lot of fun to travel somewhere new, but it's also great to get home after an adventure. Today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories about taking adventures and coming home. Do you know what's extra cool about these stories? They were written by kids just like you. So stay tuned for Book Bubble. The stories you will hear today were written by students at Long Branch Elementary School in Arlington, Virginia. Our first story was written and illustrated by Morgan Schlimmy. Morgan's story is called Gary the Pea, and it's about finding a new home. Once upon a time, there was a pea named Horatio the third, but everyone just called him Gary. Gary was a humble little pea, and he lived in a humble little bean house in the kitchen of Queen Poppy's palace, which was in a story called Cinderella. Gary was happy living in his neat and tidy house, but one day he grew tired of every day being exactly the same. The same breakfast of porridge with raisins, same job, same bedtime, and the same time to wake up and repeat the whole thing over again. I need a change, he said to his friend Ned, the strawberry. Why? Asked Ned. This is the perfect place to live. But Gary didn't think so. He still wanted a change. So after a lot of consideration, Gary decided to find a new story. So he packed, said goodbye to his friends, and set out on his quest. Gary walked all day. As the sun began to set, he set up his camp for the night. It was so dark that he couldn't see a thing. I wonder where I am, Gary thought to himself. Gary didn't sleep well that night. He dreamed of cooks making split pea soup. When Gary woke up, he packed up his camp and headed towards a huge castle. When he got there, he knocked on the door and called, "Hello? Is anybody home?" After a moment, Queen Marigold, who was in a story called The Princess and the Pea, popped her head out the door. "Oh, you are just what I need," she squealed, and she plucked Gary up and took him inside. Queen Marigold stuffed Gary under a mountain of mattresses. "This is very uncomfortable," Gary said to himself. "I don't really like this story." Just then, a princess walked in and started climbing up the ladder to the top of the mattress. "Oh no!" Gary yelped. "Please, don't tell me she's going to get on top of these mattresses." He squirmed out from between the mattresses and put a rock in his place. Then he ran out of the castle. Gary ran for a long time until he stopped at a cottage with a sign hanging above the door. He took a minute to catch his breath, then read the sign. "The Three Bears house!" Gary cried. "I don't like bears." So he kept on running. Finally, Gary reached a huge beanstalk from the story Jack and the Beanstalk. "Whoa, that's a beautiful beanstalk!" he cried as he looked up at it. Then something in the beanstalk caught Gary's eye. It was a little bean house, like the one he used to live in. Looking closer, Gary saw millions of bean houses, and a tiny conveyor belt led to each one. Near the top of the beanstalk, there was a charming bean house with a sign in the front yard that said, "For sale." "I'm going to buy that house," Gary said to himself. Then he hopped on the conveyor belt and rode up to the house. Gary bought the little bean house the next day and lived there happily for the rest of his life. That is, until a little boy came climbing up his beanstalk. But that is another story. Do you know why I like this story? I grew up in Costa Rica, but I left because I wanted to see new places, and I found a new home here in Virginia. Have you done that too? The next story is about getting lost and finding your way home. It's called A Long Way from Home and was written and illustrated by Adelaide Wilson. Chestnut woke up early on a hot summer day. He started the day by playing his favorite game, Pass the Bottle Cap, on the old oak tree stump with his best friend Timmy. Next, they jumped off the grassy hill into the tiger lily pond. The day flew by, and soon it was time for lunch. Hungry. Timmy had to go home, so Chestnut waved goodbye as Timmy hopped away. Then Chestnut started to walk home too. He walked and walked, but home was nowhere in sight. Chestnut realized he was in an unfamiliar part of the forest. He looked left, then right. Nothing looked familiar. He was lost, and he was scared. But Chestnut kept walking until he came to a stump that looked familiar. It was the oak tree stump. Next, he saw a pond glistening in the sunlight. It was the tiger lily pond. In no time, Chestnut reached home, just in time for lunch. Phew! Getting lost is scary, right? And it feels so good to figure out where you are again. Our last story is about knowing when someone else needs to go home. It's called The Lizard, and it was written and illustrated by Kaylin Brown. A lizard peacefully and quietly sits on the root of a tree. A boy sees the lizard and thinks it would make a good pet. So he plans to catch it. The boy's hands quickly make a lizard catcher out of bamboo leaves. The boy focuses on catching the lizard by looping the bamboo around its neck. He catches it. The boy puts the lizard in a glass jar and looks happily at it. Gleefully, the boy runs home to show his mom what he caught. The mother sternly disagrees with the boy about keeping the lizard as a pet. The mother does not think it's a good idea. She says that lizards need to live in their own homes. So the boy takes the lizard back to his tree. The lizard carefully crawls out of the jar and back to his home in the tree's roots. The boy looks at the lizard and the lizard looks at the boy. They are both happy to be home. I like that story because the boy learns that he can watch the lizard without taking it away from its home. If you like listening to these stories, you can find more books like them at your library. And if you're not sure what kind of stories you like, you can ask a librarian like me for help. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time on Book Bubble.